On this episode of Death Row Stories, a man is shot dead in his home.
It was premeditated, cold-blooded murder.
His wife, the accused mastermind.
From her own mouth, she convicted herself.
She was as evil as they come.
But when a terrible secret is revealed,
Here was this woman, a woman who was abused.
the justice system fails her,
Something doesn't add up here.
and her execution day arrives.
Forgive them, for they know not what they do.
There's a body in the water.
He was butchered and murdered.
Many people proclaim their innocence.
In this case, there are a number of things that stink.
This man is remorseless.
He needs to pay for it with his life.
The electric chair flashed in front of my eyes.
Get a conviction at all costs. Let the truth fall where it may.
Iuka's been a well-kept secret. I've always said that Mississippi won't claim us. We're only 5 minutes from Alabama, 10 minutes from Tennessee. We're just kind of stuck there in that northeast corner, but it's kind of the way we like it. If you get in a bind, it's amazing how people will come together there.
Late in the afternoon of June 4th, 1999, the Iuka Police Department received a 911 call.
There had been a shooting. You're hoping that nobody's really been hurt, but that was exactly what we had. We had one victim, and I remember I went in and I looked at him, and he was half on the couch and half off the couch.
Got a little light. I can't see nothing in here.
One of the shells had hit his hand. It had either severed or almost severed one of his fingers. And he had evidence of shots in his torso.
The victim was Edward Byrom Sr., a 56-year-old electrician from a respected Iuka family.
Eddie was raised in a Southern Baptist church. When he was a teenager, he was probably one of the most popular guys in town. He was a handsome fella, very charismatic. He was very talented in sports and music also. Played football, and he even marched in his football uniform in the band during halftime. And he was just delightful to be around sometimes, most of the time.
Eddie Byrom was survived by his wife, Michelle, and his 19-year-old son, Edward Jr. Jr. had called 911 and was at the scene when police arrived.
Junior was outside the house. He was kind of squatted down by the car.
This is the marks on his knuckles.
I noticed he had bloody knuckles, and I asked him, "What happened to your hand?" And he said, "Somebody shot my dad." I was mad, and I punched the doors in the house. And, you know, I was thinking, something just don't seem right. I told my men I was going to take him in and talk to him. I knew from just the first interview, Edward was involved.
Under interrogation, Jr. implicated his mother, Michelle, who had been admitted to the hospital that morning with pneumonia. Sheriff Smith went to question her.
We got in there, and I said, Mr. Byrom been shot. You won't tell me about that? I told her I'd been talking to Junior, and he's told me everything. She acted like she was confused.
You told her a little week ago, or a week and a half ago, that it's fixing to happen.
No, I thought...
Yes, you did.
No, I didn't. I did not say that.
She denied everything. It took going back and talking to Junior, talking to Miss Byrom to get to the truth. And it all started just piling up.
Junior eventually admitted that his mother had asked him to hire someone to commit the murder.
Your son, somebody that yes, he has told you it was your dad figure. He also told you who got it. We don't know the one that did it.
Michelle ultimately named Joey Gillis, a 20-year-old acquaintance of Junior's, as the trigger man.
We brought him in, which Joey denied everything. Joey never was as open as they were.
According to Junior, on the day of the murder, he gave his father's gun to Joey Gillis and dropped him off near the house. 30 minutes later, the two men hid the gun in a nearby field.
It was unbelievable. You know, they were saying it's a conspiracy. They said that Michelle was the mastermind and that she hired Joey to shoot Eddie. And the motive apparently was for the insurance money. I was like, this is crazy.
Michelle stood to gain nearly $200,000 from her husband's life insurance policies, from which she'd promised to pay Joey $15,000.
That's what this whole thing was all about. This woman worked these kids till they'd done something really horrible.
With 3 suspects in custody, prosecutor Arch Bullard focused on Michelle Byrom.
Michelle Byrom was the one that we always had set for trial first. We had decided to go after her on the capital murder and Gillis on the capital murder and plead the son out to a lesser offense in return for his testimony. We saw Junior as more sympathetic and I guess less involved than Michelle, who was an adult and had drug her son into it.
Michelle Byrom's trial began on November 13th, 2000. Jurors heard gruesome testimony from the medical examiner.
The pictures that we saw with bullet wounds to his fingertips and through the remote, seeing all that was hard.
Junior was the key witness against his mother, laying out how she had masterminded the plot to kill his father.
This is not one of those cases where you have an eyewitness or have DNA proof that confirms one side or the other. And so you're relying upon their confessions.
When is the first time y'all discussed Joey either finding somebody or doing it himself or killing your husband?
About 3 or 4 days before it happened.
You know, the proof is overwhelming. I mean, from her own mouth, she convicted herself.
Michelle Byrom's court-appointed lawyers had never tried a murder case. They rested without calling a single witness.
During the entire trial, of course, we're supposed to look at it as she is innocent. But from the start, it was just continuous tick marks in the guilty column and very few in the not guilty.
The jury deliberated for just 1 hour before finding Michelle Byrom guilty.
She snuffed Eddie out in his 50s. He was way too young to die. You know, I felt like, well, he deserves justice. He deserves justice.
You could just see it on everybody's face that, wow, this is actually real now. Now we actually had a lady's life in our hands.
On November 17th, 2000, Michelle Byrom was found guilty of a murder-for-hire plot against her husband. Now the jury would decide whether she should receive the death penalty.
It was clear to us that she was guilty. But when we went into the sentencing, now the difficult part, in my mind, was about to take place.
But jurors were met with surprising news. Michelle Byrom had signed a waiver, and the judge alone would decide her fate.
It was a relief that Judge Gardner took that out of our hands, or really, she did.
After pointed statements from the prosecution, Judge Thomas Gardner took 20 minutes to sentence Michelle Byrom to death.
It was premeditated, cold-blooded murder. And I think that, I guess, an eye for an eye. That's just my feelings.
I think she's a cruel, evil woman. What she did to her son and Joey Gillis and her husband, I felt like she was going to get what she deserved.
I turned 3 shades of white and just about passed out when the verdict came. Death by lethal injection. That is where my story begins. Trapped in a nightmare.
Before Mississippi could execute Michelle, her case would be passed to appeals attorney Llewellyn Williams.
I had probably been in the office about 2 years when we got Michelle's case. She was convicted of capital murder in a case where she didn't kill anybody, but yet here she is on death row. That was so compelling to me.
Michelle had not testified at trial, so Llewellyn went to death row to hear her side of the story.
I was the 4th child out of 7, the first girl. Mother divorced, and then she married a sleazebag. And then that's where my nightmare begins. It's where the physical, mental, sexual abuse started.
Llewellyn learned that from age 10, Michelle's stepfather had sexually abused and beaten her.
That's where I was until the age of 14, where I finally left home. I just hitched a ride to Huntsville, Alabama, and I got let off at a Motel 6. Right across the street was a go-go joint, and from 14 to 17, that's what I did, is that exotic dance.
After a few years, an electrician named Eddie Byrom started coming to the club where Michelle worked.
He came a couple times, and he asked me out one night. So I said, okay. Next thing you know, he's asking me to move in with him. I move in with him. He was 32. I was 17. I think what I was searching for was a father, someone to care. But we had good times. We had some great times. It was after I had my son, things changed.
Michelle had Junior when she was 23. A few years later, the family moved to Eddie's hometown of Iuka, where things took a turn for the worse.
You would think somebody that had been through it for all those years would have seen it, but I didn't see it coming. He really developed a warped mind. He'd go to the X-rated stores and get as many tapes as he could, and he'd film the parts that he liked the best and make his own videotapes.
He had his special room, which is actually the room where he was killed in, which was full of pornographic videos. Some of them were movies that he had taken of Michelle.
It was just a constant battle. Having your husband make passes at anybody that you bring over? Having your husband try to take your sister to bed with him? By then, not only was I on alcohol, I was prescribed by one doctor, Loracet, oxycodone, Restoril, Darvocet. I was doing all that to forget the abuse that I was suffering. And that's where we were to that point.
I knew Michelle was not happy, but there must have been things going on I was unaware of if it was that bad enough to take someone's life.
Behind closed doors, she had endured years of abuse, and the jury never heard it.
Though Michelle's lawyers argued to include Eddie's sexual habits and abuse at trial, prosecutor Arch Bullard argued otherwise.
They wanted to speak ill of the deceased, or at least put him in poor light, and I have often fought very hard to try to not desecrate the dead. I think that's inappropriate.
Judge Gardner agreed, and the jury never heard Michelle's story.
Up until this point, the only thing that's been told is really based off of what the prosecution wanted to be told. Michelle's story has never been told. We worked as a team, interviewed family members, aunts, uncles, siblings, outlining the things that they knew had happened to Michelle. The more we dug, the more I wanted to fight.
As she came to believe that Michelle Byrom did not belong on death row, Llewellyn uncovered evidence that pointed to an alternate suspect. As attorney Llewellyn Williams prepared Michelle Byrom's appeal, she questioned how Michelle came to be sentenced to death in the first place.
The sentencing hearing was going to be on a Saturday, and I drove down anticipating that I was going to testify. There were certainly questions about Michelle Byrom's mental state at the time of the offense.
Forensic psychiatrist Keith Caruso had been hired by the defense to evaluate Michelle. He found that Michelle's lifelong abuse had led to multiple psychological disorders and a cycle she could not escape.
She had claimed that she tried to leave him on 3 occasions previously and that he had gotten her back every time and beat her. What she was telling me was consistent with clinical experience, having seen many individuals who'd been exposed to this.
Caruso believed his findings would convince the jury to spare Michelle's life.
For a jury to hand down a death sentence, it must be unanimous. You've only got to get 1 out of 12 people who's not willing to go forward with this. I was kind of stunned when I got there to find it was going to be before the judge alone.
Llewellyn believed that Michelle's lawyers had made a catastrophic decision when they waived her right to sentencing by the jury.
It was kind of like pushed in my head that just, go ahead, get it over with. Waive your right. He'll go light.
There was questions whether or not she even understood what she was waiving. It was just unbelievable.
Michelle's lawyers didn't call Dr. Caruso to testify before Judge Gardner.
Only my report was going to be submitted into evidence. So I just felt like it was candidly handled pretty poorly by her attorneys.
Llewellyn felt the decisions made by Michelle's lawyers could help get Michelle off death row. But the larger question was whether Michelle should have been found guilty at all, when evidence showed her son, Junior, had his own motives. Llewellyn discovered that woven into his account of the murder were stories of abuse he had suffered at the hands of his father.
The record indicates that Edward Jr. and Edward Sr. had a very volatile relationship. They were always having arguments of one sort or another.
Junior said he and his father fought. His mother was protecting him and defending him, and that was a conflict between the mother and the father.
Llewellyn learned that leading up to the murder, this violence had been escalating.
The day of his murder, Edward Jr. and Edward Sr. had also had an argument.
In 2 letters Junior wrote Michelle from jail, he admitted to killing his father in the heat of an argument.
The fact that he was the killer, he had given a statement to that effect beforehand anyway. He gave multiple statements, all of them did. Some of them were in conflict of each other.
Michelle's lawyers had planned to surprise Junior on the stand with the letters, but their strategy backfired. Bullard objected and Judge Gardner agreed, meaning the jury would never hear Junior's confessions.
Junior was the one who had the proximity. He had a motive. He knew where the guns were. Junior was our alternate suspect.
Finally, Llewellyn turned to the other key evidence against Michelle, the taped confession from her hospital bed.
I talked to your son Edward, and Edward's one ahead and told me everything.
What did you say?
She told me he'd go ahead and find somebody, send him to you, that we keep him where he wasn't involved.
I don't know. Wait a minute. This is going over.
Llewellyn learned that at the time of her questioning, Michelle was on 12 different drugs, including heavy sedatives and painkillers.
If you have talked to somebody about him to do this?
No.
What type of talk, no?
No, I'm telling you.
You could hear that. It's like you did it. We're just going to focus on you as being the ringleader behind all this, even though you have no idea what's going on.
Don't leave him hanging out here about the Bigfoot.
No, he's not going to. I wouldn't let him.
He's fixing to.
Well, I'll take all the responsibility.
Why don't you just tell him?
He kept repeating over and over to me, "Don't let your son bite the bullet. Are you gonna let your son bite the bullet?" Finally, I said, "No, is that what you want to hear?"
Llewellyn was convinced Michelle was innocent. Soon, it would be up to the state's highest court whether to proceed with Michelle's execution. Appeals attorney Llewellyn Williams firmly believed in Michelle Byrom's innocence. She submitted Michelle's appeal to the Mississippi Supreme Court in 2005.
We had so many documents, we literally used one of our co-workers' pickup trucks to carry everything over to the Supreme Court. We really felt like the court was going to rule in our favor. We just couldn't see how they could not when they had ruled in cases with far less.
As she waited for her ruling, Michelle remained in solitary confinement on death row.
For 5 years, I was the only woman there on death row. Locked down 24/7, I was not allowed to have physical contact with anybody. The only way I could talk to people was we had little holes in the commodes, and they connected to other, cells. And we talked that way.
Michelle was not allowed to have any contact with Junior. She was totally isolated. I would go and visit, trying to be that strong rock for her in the midst of it all. You're questioning, am I doing enough? Have I done it right? Are we going to get relief?
It took close to a year for the Mississippi Supreme Court to respond.
The day that Michelle's case came down on the docket, we literally were on chairs, on the floor, everywhere. Everybody was sitting there reading.
Sorry. It just didn't work out.
In a 5-3 decision, the court concluded that despite mistakes made at trial, Michelle's conviction would stand.
It just blew our minds that they could think that everything that she had gone through didn't amount to enough for a reversal. We just could not believe it.
Here was a woman who was abused by her husband, both physically, sexually. She was abused all her life. How could that case gone as far as it did? It's outrageous. But that's the system. That's the system.
Veteran federal appeals attorney Alan Friedman would take up Michelle's case.
I've argued about 50 death penalty appeals, and I've done this long enough to know something doesn't add up here.
Michelle Byrom had been on death row for 6 years for hiring triggerman Joey Gillis to kill her husband. Yet Gillis had never been tried for capital murder.
Gillis, who's supposedly the one who did the killing and part of this contract killing, he never went to trial. When we looked at that, we were a little surprised.
Alan learned that a psychologist named Dr. Chris Lott had played a pivotal role in Joey Gillis's case.
Dr. Lott had been ordered by the judge to determine whether they were competent, sane, to stand trial, and he had determined that they were.
Chris Lott is really one of the key witnesses in this case. And the reason it's a key witness is he was neutral. He wasn't the defense expert. He wasn't the prosecutor's expert. He was the judge's expert.
When we went to try Gillis, the defense attorneys called to speak with Dr. Lott regarding the report.
Gillis's attorneys told Arch Bullard they would be calling Dr. Lott to testify. Within days, Bullard offered Gillis a deal.
Just too many problems developed. That's what happened. I'm not a big fan of plea bargaining, but it is part of what you have to do.
Joey Gillis was allowed to plead guilty to conspiracy. He served just 9 years. Alan Friedman now sought out Dr. Lott and would soon discover evidence that may have been hidden at trial by none other than Michelle's judge. Attorney Alan Friedman's team was meeting with court-appointed psychologist Dr. Chris Lott when he revealed confessions he'd heard before Michelle's trial.
In July of 2000, Judge Gardner ordered Chris Lott to evaluate all three of them. When he interviewed Junior and Joey Gillis, both of them told Dr. Lott that Junior acted alone. And they found them consistent and they found them believable.
Alan discovered that Dr. Lott had reported these confessions directly to Michelle's judge. Judge Gardner, however, never notified Michelle's defense team.
Judge Gardner knew about these confessions by Junior and Gillis before the trial. And if that's the case, I'll be polite, highly inappropriate. Dr. Lott said, I'll give you my files, I'll let you see my notes. And then he checked with the judge, and then Judge Gardner said, no, don't cooperate. Gardner put a gag order on him. And it was pretty shocking that happened.
Unable to secure Dr. Lott's help, Alan moved forward with his petition to the U.S. District Court in 2006.
It was a roller coaster ride there. You hear everything is going to go through this time. It's going to go through. Yeah, we're waiting. It's going to go through. We haven't heard anything yet.
It took 5 years, but on July 5th, 2011, the court denied Michelle's petition.
They blew us off. We got everything denied.
Joey Gillis was paroled in 2009. Junior followed in 2013. By 2014, Michelle's federal appeals were exhausted, and her execution was imminent. Alan's last chance would be with the Mississippi Supreme Court.
It was basically a Hail Mary's pass at the end. It was the last effort to try to stop it.
With Michelle's days dwindling, Alan and his team returned again to Dr. Lott.
Chris Lott finally felt guilty and spoke the truth. He finally signed the affidavit, and we thought that we had some hope on that.
But even with Dr. Lott's documented confessions, the court didn't respond. Michelle was about to become the first woman executed in Mississippi in 70 years.
I remember going out there. I don't know how many days out. It was within the week. And I told her, I didn't think we were going to win. You have to be prepared to die. And she started to cry.
He was asking me questions of, is there anybody that I wanted in particular to be there? I didn't want anybody there. I didn't want my family there. I didn't want any last meals. But I did have something to say. Forgive them, for they know not what they do.
I remember having trouble getting to walk out. My back stiffened up. And John had to help me walk out. We've had successes and we've had failure. But this was just, I couldn't believe that we were losing.
As Michelle neared execution, local reporter Ronnie Mott picked up her story.
I thought this was just going to be another sob story case. But when I started getting into Michelle's story, it just blew my mind. And I sent a text to my editor. I just said, this is crazy. You're not going to believe this. The story hit on the 19th. It just kind of snowballed. There were letter writing campaigns that sprung up. There were phone call-in campaigns, people calling the governor's office. Sister Helen Prejean had gotten involved. She was writing something about it.
Sister Helen Prejean, she's back with me now. She's a social justice advocate who opposes the death penalty.
I never write things when I'm on the road. And I was on the road giving talks, but here was this woman, a woman who was abused, who had no voice, who had no agency. She was a victim not just of physical abuse, but constitutional abuse.
Helen Prejean was the big one, because people were talking about it. She came out swinging in the editorial.
Michelle was without defense, without anybody to present the mitigating circumstances of what happens to abused women. She was without all of that. And then that confession of her son, I mean, it would have made all the difference in the world.
With hours to go, the court of public opinion had become Michelle Byrom's last best hope.
Mississippi is about to execute the first woman put to death in the Magnolia State in 70 years. Now it's up to the justices here at the Mississippi Supreme Court to decide whether Michelle Byrom will live or die.
On the morning of March 27, 2014, Michelle Byrom was hours from execution.
I needed to prepare to get myself ready. And then the woman on death row said, "Michelle, you're on the news. You're going home. Look, look." So I go running there and I turn on my TV, and right there.
The Mississippi Supreme Court reverses Michelle Byrom's capital murder conviction and orders a new trial for her in Tishomingo County.
They had thrown out everything unanimously. I can only guess why. I think the Mississippi Supreme Court did not want Judge Gardner to take the stand because they would have been asked, when did you hear about what Dr. Lott knew, and when did you know it?
The court went further and barred Judge Gardner from presiding over the retrial.
They've never done anything like that before in a death penalty case. Disqualified him.
Iuka prosecutor Richard Bowen would be in charge of Michelle's retrial. But with both Junior and Gillis out on parole, they were refusing to testify. Michelle, on the other hand, was vowing to take the stand.
I think she would have explained that she confessed more to try to protect her son, Edward Jr., than because of any real culpability on her part. One of the two, Edward Jr. or Joey Gillis, pulled the trigger. Was it fair and proportional that she actually served more time than the two actual killers? The District Attorney's Office came to the conclusion to allow her to plead to what the others pled to, conspiracy to commit murder. She got what amounted to basically time served.
On June 26, 2015, after 14 years on death row, Michelle Byrom was freed.
I can't believe, that she gets to walk free. It really affected our whole family. And the whole town of Iuka, too.
It's hard to believe that a man is dead, and the longest time served by any of them was 16 years. So no, I do not believe justice was served.
The media shined a light on this case. It saved me pain and embarrassment, humiliation. Losing a winning case. Some will disagree with me and say, well, you got relief. What are you complaining about? She was set free. It came too close. If you need the press to shine a light on your case to show the injustice, then the system really isn't working. I know there are other cases where the light wasn't shined and people died.
Theoretically, we're supposed to have the best system in the world. Theoretically, the Supreme Court, when they put the death penalty back, said it's to be reserved for only the worst of the worst murders. So Michelle Byrom gets pulled up in the net. She's considered the worst of the worst. And now look, as the truth emerges, it just shows how faulty the whole system is. We should never have undertaken to think that we were going to be able to select the worst of the worst murders. Truthfully, nobody knows what that means.
When my brother picked me up from jail, I wanted to go to see my house, and I wanted to go visit my husband's grave. And my brother Kenneth said, hell no, I'm gonna get you out of Dodge before they figure out something else to catch you for. So we left Dodge and never did turn back around. I didn't get to walk out of there, but I got to roll out of there. And we rolled the hell out of Mississippi.